Chapter 7 versus Chapter 13 bankruptcy. Which is right for the person? How do we unpack this? Where do you want to begin with this? Because this is a big question.
Yeah, I'm going to start with what I call the gold standard of bankruptcy, and that's going to be your Chapter 7. I say it's the gold standard of bankruptcy because in the Chapter 7, all of your medical debt, personal loans, credit cards are going to be discharged through that bankruptcy. What does discharge mean? It means you no longer owe it and they can't come after you for it. And so Chapter 7 is really where we try and fit all of our potential callers in. But there are circumstances where we need to look at a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. And Phil, you look like you might have a question. You want me to go into
Oh, no, no.
13?
Yeah, no. So Chapter 7 is where you want to put them in because it discharges all their debt at once, right? All
Yep.
dischargeable debt. Let's jump into 13. That's great.
Sure. So Chapter 13, I like to say is we reserve our Chapter 13 for our high income earners or those that have a lot of assets to protect. And so when you file in either Chapter 7 or Chapter 13, you have to do what's called a means test. And what they're doing is that they're looking at your income to see which chapter you'd fit in. Now, assuming you're a high earner, let's say you make, $150,000 a year, but you're still in a lot of debt. That's where we would say, okay, well, let's look at a Chapter 13. A Chapter 13 is where they're going to put you into a payment plan up to 5 years where you're going to repay a portion of your unsecured debt, and the rest of it after that 5 years will be discharged just like in that Chapter 7.
Mhm. And now with regard to Chapter 13 or Chapter 7, there's a lot of nuances based on the state because there's certain states because the exemptions or the what would take you to qualify for a 7 are so vastly different that a lot of states are heavy on the 13, right? So it does depend on the state on this. Is that fair to say, Shawn?
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on the state. And when Philip's talking about exemptions, so in a Chapter 7, there are certain assets that you're allowed to keep. Here in Florida, you're allowed to keep 100% of your homestead residence. You're allowed to keep up to $5,000 of equity in the vehicle. But that's not the same for every state. So
Mhm.
it really depends on that state, what you would qualify for an exemption. Therefore, what would qualify you back for that Chapter 7 or that Chapter 13? And Philip, I think that the second big reason that we file a Chapter 13 is, let's say you're going through a foreclosure, right? We're seeing foreclosures again, they're starting to tick up. When a Chapter 13, you can help restructure that mortgage or that back due amount through those 5 years. So you're not having to come up, let's say you're $50,000 behind in your mortgage payment, right? You don't have to come up with that $50,000 to file that Chapter 13. You can break that $50,000 up across those 5 years and still make that mortgage payment. So that way you get to keep your house. And that's really where a Chapter 13 can be really beneficial.
So what I'm hearing is the chapter sevens, it depends on the state, but the chapter sevens, you call it the gold standard. It wipes away all your dischargeable debt. Dischargeable debt meaning credit cards, medical debt, payday loans, collections, anything like this, wiped away,
Repossessions.
repossessions, clean, past rent from landlords, wiped them all away. You owe nothing back, right?
That's correct.
Chapter 13 are for people either going for foreclosures, high income earners, people who are make more than the average person, right?
Or
People,
people that have a bunch of assets. Sorry, Phil, I didn't mean
no,
to
no,
interrupt,
please,
but I
please.
wanted to, people
Lot,
that have multiple properties, they have renters or rental
multiple
properties.
properties, jewelry, whatever it is. But what the advantage is, so with the 7, you wipe it all away. 13, you have to pay it back. But guess what? You're not being charged the high interest rate. You know, the interest rate on whatever car loan you have goes way, way, way down, no matter what your credit is, right? And yes, you're paying it back, but you're getting a clean start. You don't feel the pressure of the compounding of the interest and the debt. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct, Phil. And what I like to say is, we've talked often as a bankruptcy attorney and to those working in the bankruptcy field, how do we get across the stigma from filing bankruptcy, right? People think filing bankruptcy is the end of the world, and it's not. It's meant to be a tool for a fresh start.
Yeah.
But a lot of folks often find that that Chapter 13 is a little bit less of a stigma because they're still, their creditors are still Morally, their creditors are still getting something from them
Oh yeah,
in that monthly payment plan.
absolutely.
But obviously, we would, you know, try and recommend the Chapter 7 for any of those
Well, it all
debtors that.
depends what you qualify for, right? And that's why it's important to talk to a bankruptcy attorney, figure it out. This is not something you're going to figure out on your own. A lot of people try to, and they end up calling a bankruptcy attorney. There's advantages too with 13s, right? Because, like you said, the creditors are getting something back. For example, getting a home, okay? You can buy a home after 12 on time payments in a Chapter 13. 12, meaning you're in an active 13, you're making the payments, and you can qualify for a home. You can qualify for a home with a 3.5% down payment, and there are down payment assistance programs on that. You can check out Evergreen or evergreenclass.com to learn more about that. As opposed to Chapter 7, you have to wait 2 years to buy a home. So there's give and take on both of them, but it's really about what you qualify for, right, Shawn?
At the end of the day, our job is to try and minimize the pain from a bankruptcy, right?
Yeah.
And bankruptcy shouldn't be painful at all.
Yeah.
But if I can eliminate all of your dischargeable debt, well, that's a win for everybody.
Well, and it just, the fresh start and the new life people feel after bankruptcy. We hold these question and answer calls for people after they file bankruptcy, teaching them how to rebuild their life after bankruptcy. And what always surprises me is when people say, "Gosh, man, I wish I would have filed years sooner. I wish I would have filed when I got into trouble," as opposed to prolonging the pain because of bankruptcy.
Well, I think
Or not,
again,
excuse me.
the
Let me rephrase. As
no,
opposed to
no, but I
prolong.
think the idea, Phil, is that the big stigma is filing bankruptcy, right?
Yeah.
People always, when I meet somebody out on the street, and it's always like, "Oh, I hope I never have to use you," and I always say, I bet you, you only call me when there's a fire. If there's smoke, we could probably help too."
Yeah.
But the idea, Phil, really is that there's a stigma in filing bankruptcy, which means people are going to do everything possible to pay off their debt. They're going to go to the credit debt consolidation companies where they're paying tens of thousands of dollars to companies to try and settle their debt with no guarantee.
Yeah.
Bankruptcy is the guarantee, and it
Hmm.
is a tool to get you that fresh start. So if you can take the emotional aspect of the stigma and understand that thousands of people file bankruptcy, thousands, hundreds of thousands over the year, millions of people have
Oh yeah.
filed bankruptcy.
Oh yeah. Oh, millions and millions.
You're not alone.
Yeah.
And in the end of the day, you are not alone and you'll get that fresh start. It's a tool to help you get there.
Yeah. Shawn, thank you so much for your time. Once again, Shawn Defries, Defries Law Firm in Florida, filing bankruptcy statewide. Law Unpacked, his podcast. Shawn, thank you so much for your time. You're a wealth of knowledge.
Thanks, Phil. Nice to see you, and we'll talk soon.
See you soon.